Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Gambling Did You Know session. Today, we're going to be talking about a connection between tobacco use and gambling. So we're going to find out a little bit more about that, what that connection might be. And we'll start off by just talking a little bit about tobacco, some background here. So if you're not too familiar with it, tobacco is a plant grown for its leaves. Those leaves are kind of ground up a little bit. They're placed into different products. Tobacco does contain nicotine. That's kind of one of the major points that we like to talk about when we're mentioning tobacco, because nicotine is an addictive chemical. This is something that can actually affect how the brain works. We'll talk about that a little bit briefly in a minute, but it can actually affect how our brains work and make a person crave more tobacco products, more, cigarettes, cigars, chewing tobacco, all of these things contain nicotine, hookah, e-cigarettes, or vapes, whatever you want to call those. So all of these products are what we would classify as tobacco products, or we classify e-cigarettes a little bit sometimes as nicotine products as well, because they can actually just take the nicotine, not from actually tobacco, but they can take nicotine and put it in e-cigarettes there as well. So I'm going to use tobacco products generally today in our presentation, but I am talking about e-cigarettes and vapes as well there. Just finding out a little bit more of how dangerous tobacco really is. This is something that is, I think, not really disputed too much nowadays. We have a lot of data, especially with cigarettes, cigars, things like that, that have been around for a long period of time. We have a lot of data on these types of things, so they definitely can be harmful. Again, nicotine affects the brain, so it can make that person crave more of this substance. Whatever, tobacco product we're talking about, once again, they all do contain nicotine, and they all can be addictive in that sense. Some people might not know this, though, that there are about 600 different ingredients that go into every single cigarette on average. So, you have 600 different things, actually placed in those cigarettes, which, right off the bat, if you are eating something that has 600 ingredients, it's probably almost definitely not going to be good for you. So, if you're talking about smoking something that has 600 ingredients in it, you can probably guess it's not going to be good for your health. But that's kind of amplified when we talk about the number of chemicals that are found in actual cigarette smoke. And that is about 7,000 chemicals. And this is according to the American Lung Association. So 7,000 different chemicals are in cigarette smoke. Whenever a person is breathing that in, they're just taking in a large number of these chemicals. And obviously, they can have many different effects across the body. We'll talk about some of those effects in just a minute. But when we talk about, nicotine being addictive, to be honest, more of the severe effects actually come from these 7,000 chemicals, not necessarily nicotine itself. But once again, it's amplified because nicotine is the addictive part of cigarettes. So, you've kind of got both of those things going on, where there's dangerous chemicals and nicotine is another dangerous chemical, but it's dangerous in the sense that it is addictive. And I am going to relate this back to gambling as well. Again, I just want to give a little bit of a background here. So thinking about how dangerous tobacco actually is, smoking or using tobacco products can basically increase your risk for each of these things, or directly cause each of these problems, among many others, actually. So I didn't make a complete list of all the problems that can come from, smoking or using tobacco products. But, some of the main ones that we probably are familiar with, things like cancer. So lung cancer, mouth cancer, cancer across the body, heart disease, strokes, other lung diseases. It can actually increase your risk for diabetes and things like that. Emphysema is, a problem with the lungs as well. So it affects, the air sacs, our alveoli in our lungs. It kind of kills those cells, and then it's harder for a person to breathe. Chronic bronchitis, so kind of inflammation of, bronchial tubes, things like that. tuberculosis. It can actually increase your risk for eye diseases as well, and lead to just kind of a whole host of immune system problems. So that's going to, again, have effects all the way across the body just with those immune system problems. And once again, there's many other problems that can come from this as well. I don't want to make light of that, and this is definitely not a complete list, but I don't want to spend too much time on just talking about how dangerous tobacco use can be. So let's start to relate this back to the gambling piece. Okay, so I have a couple studies I'm going to just explain very briefly, and there is a link here at the bottom of the screen if you want to, find out more information or go to this study. You can do that as well there. So this was actually a study at a gambling treatment program. They had people who were actually going to get treatment for their gambling habits. They had been struggling with gambling, and they were doing, research on tobacco and gambling. So they actually found that, daily smokers, people who are smoking on a daily basis, who also were gambling, tended to not only gamble more on, more days, but they also would spend in general more money specifically on gambling. So, obviously that's a big sign that, if you're spending more time and money on gambling, there's a higher risk there than someone who's not spending much time or money gambling. And, that risk was realized here where they found that people who do smoke daily are actually more likely to have more severe gambling problems. And that kind of makes sense, again, just because they are gambling, to a greater degree in a sense. They also found that 2/3 of these gamblers who were seeking treatment were also daily cigarette smokers. So that is just kind of showing that the prevalence there a little bit, that tobacco and gambling, among other substances as well in gambling, they can kind of go together. And this is something that we have seen across the research as well, is that, once a person develops some sort of addictive behavior, whether that is gambling or, tobacco use disorder, they can actually be more likely to develop other addictive behaviors as well. So that was just kind of this study, just showing that a little bit. The next study is looking at youth, actually. And I will say there's not as much research out there with youth, not only because, you have to be generally 18 to 21 to, use or to gamble, but you also have to be 21 to technically legally use tobacco products as well. So, there's not as many studies out there for youth, but they actually had this one in Connecticut. So this was a survey of almost 1,600 high school students, and they were basically classifying them based off their gambling severity. So, are they having gambling problems even in high school? That's basically what they were looking at, alongside, again, the tobacco aspect as well. So they did find that students with higher severity gambling, so, more gambling problems, were more likely to actually report things like regular smoking, heavy smoking, and they tended to start smoking at an earlier age. They were also more likely to report things like lower grades, the use of other substances, and potentially aggressive behaviors as well. So that's something to keep in mind too, that, these things don't just happen in a vacuum. They can kind of increase risk factors in other ways too. So they can affect other parts of your life, like, your schooling, your personality, behaviors, things like that as well. So I think that was an interesting study as well. And again, you can see at the bottom, I've cited this, so you can go to this study as well and look at it for yourself. Next, I want to just kind of talk, just briefly about why people use tobacco and why people gamble. And we'll kind of see if there's any overlap here. So generally, there's a number of different reasons why a person might be using tobacco, or might kind of start using tobacco at least. One of those is that, in popular media and things like that for many, many years, we're not seeing this quite as much nowadays. It's still somewhat prevalent though, but basically tobacco use has been considered cool or glamorized in different things. Again, in TV shows and movies and things like that, A lot of times, you would have a cool character smoking or using tobacco products, right? So that's kind of one thing that can start to get people thinking about using tobacco products. A lot of times, we see our parents using these things, right? So that can get youth involved for sure. Excuse me, as well as a actual peer pressure aspect that is still happening, where someone will either actively or just kind of indirectly peer pressure someone to get into using substances. So it can feel like everybody is doing it. Sometimes people want to just try new things, and tobacco is a new thing to them. And other times people want to cope and relax, and this is talked about as being a relaxing behavior sometimes, so that's something that can draw people as well. Excuse me. So now let's see why people gamble. So a major reason, and we've talked about this before, that this isn't actually usually the case, but a lot of times people gamble in order to make money. But besides that, you'll see a lot of the similar things that we had just talked about, right? So it can be glamorized, especially winning the lottery, winning at the casino, things like that are glamorized. That's considered cool. That's something that you want to do. Sometimes youth are seeing their parents do it again, whether that's, going to the casino or, just having a family poker night, something like that. Peer pressures can still happen with gambling. I think access and availability is a really big reason, especially nowadays when we have gambling online, gambling on our smartphones. Just the access and the availability is so huge, so large right now. And that's probably not going to be going away anytime soon. So that's going to be a big draw for people. Again, many people want to try new things. They might want to try gambling, just see what it's about. And other people kind of think that it can be, a good way to cope or relax. So, again, if you look back between these two, why do people use tobacco? Why do people gamble? You see a lot of overlap. And that's kind of showing again that there is a connection between tobacco use and gambling. So I do want to, before we wrap up here a little bit today, I do want to talk a little bit about e-cigarettes. I haven't mentioned those too much today. These are considered, or they're called vapes as well, like I mentioned. A lot of times they're considered less harmful than cigarettes or other tobacco products. But I do want to mention they do contain dangerous chemicals and toxic chemicals. So they do contain, nicotine still, that's number one. They can have cancer-causing chemicals, heavy metals, which, we should not be breathing in, essentially, tin, nickel, lead, things like that. Ultra fine particles, what that is very, very tiny particles that can get deep inside your lungs and start to accumulate there and cause kind of a host of different problems. Excuse me, I have something in my throat there. But so basically what I'm trying to say is that e-cigarettes, while they might be kind of promoted as being healthier than cigarettes, they still can be harmful. They still can be dangerous. And another study actually did show that e-cigarette use was associated with having more severe gambling problems and higher degree of participating in gambling activities. So we're seeing that same kind of thing that we're seeing with cigarettes, with e-cigarettes or vapes as well. And that is pretty much all I have for you today, kind of just showing that connection a little bit between tobacco use and gambling. I do have some resources here. So the main differing one from normal is our Michigan Tobacco Quit link. You can call this number or text this number, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. It does have 24/7 free information. You can get a tobacco treatment referral. And again, you can text message this number as well. Besides that, we do have the Michigan Problem Gambling Helpline, the Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network Crisis Helpline. You can find more information just on the michigan.gov website. And then we do have our phone number as well with the LAHC. So with that, I do want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and we will see you next time with another Gambling Did You Know session.